and district-level administration participate in annual training or with the frequency that it's offered is if less than annually to ensure that claims are investigated fairly and objectively. And in response to policy ACAAR, Student Discrimination and Harassment Complaint Procedure, the association would like to ask that the policy be clarified to state which option of procedures is going to be used when addressing discrimination. Right now it reads that there are a variety of ways that a claim could be handled, as well as stating how the document is structured. We would like to know how the claims are going to be investigated for clarity on our end, in case it could impact staff working conditions. Thank you for your consideration of these requests as you decide to approve or not approve these policies this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marshall Archer, One Waycott Way, here in Saco. I, Chair LaFortune, school board member, superintendent, I speak to you to talk about the budget that the superintendent presented to us last week when I saw you from the other side. On Friday, I had a chance to do a private tour with the city administrator, and he showed me what Saco Middle School looks like, specifically their chairs, their desks, and just overall building, just it's stressed, it's tired. I speak to you, typically, we've just changed how this council looks at budgets. It used to be, we used to make, why am I drawing a blank on the term? We used to break it down into cost centers, sorry. Now we're, per our charter, we're going to be agreeing on the totality of the budget. So this is the total amount. So what I want to do is I want to encourage you to take into what I have to say into consideration, because I could put it on the back end where I make an amendment to the budget. But when we do this, we just raise the money, but we don't do a line item. This is where I want to just present to you all a possible solution. So I looked at the superintendent's budget, and give or take, it was about a $1.6 million raise. Is that accurate? Okay. If you look at the last this will be my 5th budget as a counselor. If you go back, it's been an average about $3 million request to council with a high of $5 million for 1 year. So when I was pleasantly surprised to see 1.6 million. As we know, over the next several years, we'll be looking a lot on our pre-K to grade 5 school system. So I want to take this opportunity to say it's a great budget. I liked it. I didn't have to look at it with a defensive eye. I got to look at it as is, in defense of the budget, the totality of the city budget, including the school board. So I would actually like to put forward, I like what I see so far based on what was presented. Again, you haven't discussed it yet, you haven't got to it. I thought that this would probably be the best time to implement, or not implement, but to encourage you to look at it. I would suggest, as the budget is that we add about $200,000 for a desk and chairs, and also $100,000 for painting. These are estimates provided me by the, I was going to say city administrator, but we changed seats. Sorry about that, Jeremy. That's what I'm proposing. So I hope over the next couple of weeks, when you're looking at the superintendent's budget, what he's presented, which I think is fair, considering some of our past years were significantly higher, that we take this time this year, upcoming year, to kind of focus on Saco Middle School, because for the next 5 years, we'll be looking at what the pre-K to 5 looks like. And I'm not here to define that, because we don't know. But I do know that our attention will not be on Saco Middle School, because we only have so many resources. So I do thank you for your time, and I hope that we hear some discussions related to meeting some of the needs of the desk and chairs, because when I did this tour, legitimately, I was looking to see if I signed any of those desks. Because I was at that school in 94, 95, and 96, and I was truly looking like, is my name anywhere around here? That was, I'm dating myself now, more than 20 years ago, I'll just say that, 25 years ago. I definitely think it's time to just take this moment until we start getting into the new school system, what it looks like, and just focus on Saco Middle School. That's it. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to address the school board? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public session, and that brings us to the superintendent's report.
Okay, good evening. Several items to just update you on tonight. As you all know, today was a day for us where the SOP has changed with an announcement a week ago from the Maine CDC and governor that masks became optional. And I think while that is an individual choice by everybody that they expressed today, the good piece about coming in today is that our data has been trending really in the right direction. At this point, so far this week, we have 0 positive pools, and we need to knock on wood and hope that that continues. But today was, for some of our kiddos, something they experienced something today that they hadn't done in 2 years or in their career. So let's hope that we continue to use other measures of mitigation and that we can continue in this positive trend. Some of the work that we tend to look at in the school department is we are always looking at our recruitment and hiring practices, and with Chris and Meg leading up some work, we will begin working with a company called Inclusion Maine as we look to bring a more diversified applicant pool and hopefully hirings into the school department. I think this is a step as we begin to see a change in our student body and the diversity within our student body. We must also match that with our staff. So we have started the process of working with Inclusion Maine to try to recruit and hire from a greater pool of applicants. I also want to put a thanks out to Chris and Meg and the team in general in collaboration with Saco STEAM. So Saco STEAM is, as you know, they're a nonprofit here. And one of the things as a school department that would be helpful for us as we move along the way would be developing some sort of education foundation that's a nonprofit. And Saco STEAM in this situation serves that purpose very well because there is a lot of funding that's available for us if we can operate in that realm. And Chris and the team worked on a John T. Gorman Foundation grant that we've put in with Saco STEAM as our sponsor. And this has a lot to do with addressing housing and food insecurity within the community. There's a big need. There's whether that's funding for additional backpack programs, emergency housing and rental assistance for families and our students who become displaced, funding for expanded school nutrition services for all Saco students, and contracting with our partners at Apex Youth Connections to look to hire a half-time liaison that we're currently grant funded for from the state level to help with some of our displaced population. Chris, I know the phone calls are really off the chart right now, and as we look at rising costs, inflation, heating, electricity, we have students whose families are really struggling, and we're doing our best to try to, be a support on the school side, and funds are limited. But like the initiative that's been put forward by this group, as we need to work with, our partners in Dayton and Biddeford and try to make sure that we're taking care of our kids and we can impact families in a positive way when times are tough. I would also say we're kind of into that winter season at the middle school where there's indoor track and swimming that's occurring in volleyball. And one of our more important events is our unified basketball team has started at SMS, and I know that we had 3 games scheduled, and we were able to pull some strings and add that 4th game with a cross river game that will be on March 21st at BMS, at Biddeford Middle School, but just seeing the kids out there participating. If you get to go to one athletic event all year, these are the ones to get to. So if you need a schedule on those, just great events. Want a reminder to City Council and to School Committee that I was able to go, Mr. Archer, the other day and tour Saco Middle School, but on March 14th and March 17th at 4 p.m., I'll be available at the school to give others who would like to see a building a tour. I'd also like to thank the entire team for they've started the process of programming for summer school, ELL summer school, and special education summer school, and there's a lot that goes into that piece. We have some available monies through Title III to support our ELL students, and we're looking at providing some tutoring. And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was 6 through 12 we were going to be able to provide some options. Yeah, so we have the ability to provide some additional tutoring for those students using some grant funding from the state through Title III funds. And then finally, tonight we had a site selection, site inventory committee, and Meg has some documents for you that we'll hand out that were part of that committee. It'll be on the website. But really, our goal was to break down the available sites. And Meg, I caught people on the way out, and it sounds like we are kind of down to 3 possibilities. So we'll be scheduling another public hearing or a public meeting very soon. The reason that it was extremely important for us tonight to get down to a smaller number is because our ability to test for vernal pools is in the springtime. And if we only went forward with one site, and then let's say that site came back in a situation that was no good, we're waiting for another year, and so we can't delay that. So our goal is to be down to 3 sites, work with the department, and try to push to get those all tested this spring, so we can continue our work to narrow those down. Any questions?
Looks like no questions. Okay. Moving on, that brings us to the chair's report. I don't have a specific report. However, I know there was a question that I've gotten from a couple school members about when the agreement with Biddeford School Department would be signed. That was awaiting a meeting that the Biddeford School Department was going to have similar to ours. The school board was going to have that was similar to ours, and I had not heard if that had occurred yet.
They did that tonight.
Okay.
At 5 o'clock or 5:30 or so, they voted on that.
Great. So as soon as that, as they finish up, I will get that document signed, and we will be officially in that agreement. All right, moving on. There are no staff reports this evening. Board subcommittee minutes are noted in the agenda. There's a link to the strategic committee meeting from 2/9. And there's also mention of a finance committee that's coming up on the 23rd. Okay, moving on to old business, of which there is none. That brings us to new hires with no action. Are there any questions for the superintendent related to those? Okay, moving on to resignations. One of those requires a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move we accept the resignation of Adam C.K. Burns teacher, effective at the end of the 2021-22 school year.
Second.
Sarah Truman first, Jen Preble second. Okay. Any discussion? Okay, roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
I vote yes. School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the COVID update.
So I mentioned this a little bit in my superintendent's report, that the numbers are trending in obviously the right direction. We are going to continue to put this update in the packet so that we can watch this every couple of weeks of new positive cases or positive pools. We also, throughout our process, will still be sending out school-wide information to families about positive cases for the foreseeable future until we feel more comfortable of what the changes may, or how the changes may impact us.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to item D, which is the budget presentation and overview.
Okay, please load on my computer. All right, there it is. Okay, so this is a presentation that's here for, that is, you know, a little bit bigger of a picture view than what we did the other night at the school committee, at the school board workshop, but really to walk us through what some of the biggest pieces are that make up the state subsidy and the funding formula, and how there are certain things that as a school department / city, we want to pay attention to. So the first piece that you've heard me talk about a little bit this year and some last year during the budget process is city valuation. And the funding formula component is put together of two parts: students and your student counts, and city valuation. And as we've said several times here, when we look at communities in southern Maine, you have a situation where the growth of property value is outpacing that of the rest of the state. When we did a comparison of looking at the funding that came this year to schools, the governor put an extra $30 million into general purpose aid. Of that $30 million, you had approximately 140 schools actually take 36 million of that money towards additional subsidies in their 279. You had like half a dozen communities kind of just hold steady, and those were people who had a valuation increase of about 6%. They lost about $1.9 million. And then you had approximately 20 schools that were 7% valuation growth that actually lost $10+ million in subsidy through those communities. Now, one of those was Saco. Saco lost $514,000 of additional state subsidy. And we talked about at the last meeting that last June, everybody was happy because you saw additional state funds coming our way in the tune of about $1.6 million. In Saco's situation, we took about $1 million of that, and all of that money is coming in. We didn't spend it. And that's coming in, and we're going to be at the end of the year because we will be revenue high, and we're going to take $1 million and push it towards paying back that fund balance that we have with the city. So if we all remember, so we get to wipe that piece out. We took $300,000 of that additional subsidy to come in and paid for what would be the first year of our building study, the work that we're doing now on site selection with the architects. So we used $300,000 worth of state funds to push into that pot. What's important about that is that when we vote as a community and we approve a school, that money will come back to us for use on whatever the next project is, which leaves a couple of $100,000 that will be excess revenue in the budget. So we had a situation where we didn't really commit that to any said cost that was in the budget that we would have to plan for in another year. As we come to this cycle, 6 months later, we look at additional revenue, and that's at about the $1 million mark for state subsidy from not necessarily last spring's final, but what we were planning the budget on. So you have a little bit of a cushion there. Would have liked to have had the full $1.6 million again, but because of rising valuation in the city and some expenditure pieces, because parts of the ED 279 are based off expenditures, we lost $514,000. So we're starting a little bit up. In some ways you're starting behind, but because as a board we didn't spend the other subsidy, we get to apply that to the next budget. When we look at our city's growth on this chart over the last several years, you can see the city starting to pick up steam. To a tune of our growth over the last couple of years have been around $164, $165 million additionally. So as our property valuation outpaces the state's, the money is going to get spread differently, which means you will continue in southern Maine, coastal communities, and probably anywhere where there's a major lake to see those property values rise. We know that if a house in Saco is put on the market right now, that doesn't last very long, anywhere in southern Maine. Now, with rising interest rates for homes, maybe we'll see that cool a little bit, but we already know that we enter next budget cycle with more growth than we had this year. As we look at that valuation, you say to yourself, okay, will Saco valuation outpace the state? And yeah, it's probably going to. We know what housing costs in southern Maine do. So one of the things that I always like for us to at least look at, and this is like the worst case scenario picture that I paint here, is that if you looked at your data from this year, and then you looked at what your new 3-year average in valuation is, and you assume that everything else stayed the same, and Meg, you can hit the next slide, you would see that we would be up against it again for state subsidy reduction in a following year. Now, this is an overblown number because we know that there will be many things in the school department that will change, from student population to a rising subsidized pupil cost to other communities having some growth. This is assuming that nobody else has any growth. And when this happens, I think what you can predict is that next year when we're sitting at the table, I would be predicting that there would be some subsidy loss if things stay exactly the same. It's also really important to remember that we're living in a time where the state is actually funding over 55% education. That hasn't happened before. And we also have a situation where we know that there will be a gubernatorial election and things obviously can change around elections. So I think we have to be cautious as we think about the future and think about what we have for carryover and all of those pieces to see if we can kind of stem the tide a little bit. The next slide that I'd like to go to is I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about where does your funding come from and how does this get made up. And so in the next 5 pages, you kind of have your ED 279, your funding formula. And we have some kind of red boxes that I want to walk you through. So the first one is, the first page is about building your student EPS rate. And that's at the bottom of the page. And what's important about that is that this is a situation where the higher the number at the bottom of the page, on page 1, is where you want to be. Because page 2 is where factors and multipliers come in. So because we are on page 1, we are a school district that essentially manages the pre-K through 8 population. We're looking at student counts that have a per pupil average about 1,800 kids, give or take. Now, certainly we know that pupil counts based off the last 2 years in COVID have had some fluctuations as some people chose different alternatives for education over the last couple of years, but we're hopeful that we'll get some of those students back in our schools. But on the other hand, we know that the state of Maine is losing, this year they lost 2,500 students just statewide. When you look at our enrollment projections that were done 5 years ago for the first time, or one of the times they looked at young school, we're about exactly where they projected us to be. We do have some of the positive about possible student growth is knowing that, you know, in Saco on the young school side, I think it was 34, Chris, number of open building permits when we did the reopening plan last year, and we can look around and we see some housing developments occurring, hoping that those have students in them that would bring them to our schools. When you look down at this next section, now you're talking about staff ratios to students. So what the state does is they go through each age band that's there, and they set a ratio of staff to students, which is for essential programming and services. EPS, essential. Well, essential is kind of like the floor, meaning that you should have this. And when you look at that red box on the side, if you are meeting the state funding formula, and again, mathematically we're talking meeting the state funding formula to maximize the amount of subsidy you'd get, when it is a 1.0, that is when they say your ratios exactly meet the formula. When it's under that, theoretically, in the eyes of the mathematical formula, they would consider you at a better staffing ratio than what's recommended. There's been, I think last year we looked at some data comparing ourselves to other York and Cumberland County school districts, and our teaching staff ratios here in Saco are pretty healthy. When you look down to something like clerical and school administration, you can't get much closer than you have in those situations if you were saying that you are meeting essential programming and services. If you go down further on this page, what this does is this front part, by using the student counts, using your staff counts, their salaries are fed into a matrix that spits out a subsidy number. So the data, so the DOE says, Jeff, you're a teacher of 20 years with a master's degree. You're worth X amount of dollars. And Jen, you may be a third-year teacher with no master's degree, and you have a number assigned to you. That piece all adds together, fills into the matrix, and you multiply it by your ratio. Okay, so we take $7.6 million, we multiply it by 0.83, and 6.397 million is a number that we start to build on as we move down the page to get to student EPS rate. Now the third red box on this front page is your regional adjustment. What that says is that different regions of the state are more costly to live in than others. These fluctuate from, we're at a 1.09 versus there are places in, I believe, Washington County that are like a 0.84, so they actually get a negative adjustment on the front page because someone would argue that it could be less costly to live there. Now, superintendents certainly have that argument with each other all the time about whether this is right or not, but in our situation, this works in our favor. And at the end of the page, it creates a situation where you have an EPS student rate, which is used as our multiplier for all things page 2. At the secondary level, when they look at our secondary school students, that is a state rate because we don't contribute to that matrix because we send our kids to Thornton Academy. When you get to page 2, now it does bring in those 9 through 12 students into the equation in the first box, and those are your subsidizable pupil counts. So on this page, it looks at your pre-K students, it looks at your K-8 students, it looks at your 9-12 students, and you get a total that is averaged up. That then factors into this next calculation where student count times your student EPS rate creates a dollar amount that you're building towards an operational allocation, which is at the bottom of the page. Again, you want these numbers to be as high as possible. Now, two really important factors changed for us a little bit this year, and let's look at our disadvantage rates. As we know, students across the state and across the nation receive a subsidizable lunch, which means that all kids have the ability to eat for free at school, in a public school. And over the last 3 years, certainly with COVID come in, this students used to be qualified by filling out a form at the beginning of the year. Well, the incentive to fill out that form is kind of not there if everybody, which rightfully so, I'm a firm believer that lunch should be subsidized for all kids. It is a leveler of the playing field. But they used a 3-year average and the highest of those this year and a one-time switch at the state level. This is important for us because that number is higher than it probably would be because of the ability to collect forms over the last couple of years. This is something that our voice in Augusta, as we move forward and they look at the funding formula for the next year, we have to advocate for keeping this high. And more importantly, the second box on this page is weighted averages. So when your disadvantage rate is at about 30%, they look at the number of students in that kind of grade span, and if you look at K through 8 disadvantaged, if you look at the 30.19% of our 1,819 students, 514 of them would be in a disadvantaged category. Now the next piece they did is they changed the weight and the money that they put behind our disadvantaged population, which is extremely important because this was at 0.15, and so you multiply the 0.15 times the $7,794 per elementary student, and you get additional funding. This is an area that we have to continue to support with our voice in Augusta, our voice on the funding committees, because schools should be putting more money behind students who are economically disadvantaged. We know that it's the right thing to do and something that we need to continue to advocate for. If those weights change back, as you can see in certain situations throughout here, there's, $1.3 million of subsidy that comes in that amount, which would probably take 25% off, which would lower your operating allocation on this page and hurt you in future subsidy. Now we go to page 3, and page 3 is about your kind of subsidized costs based off expenditures. And so you look at gifted and talented education, special education allocation, high cost out of district allocation, your transportation expenses, and then your approved bus leases, plus your teacher retirement. And those are all numbers that through the state formula and through expenses, they calculate up and they add to your adjusted operating allocation. We go down one more section. And if you remember last year, we were able to get that toddle-in lease added on late in the year. We have that for 5 years. We're able to get some subsidy back on that. So we applied again. We got another $81,000 sitting in this category, which helps with that lease cost and increases our subsidy. You'll see insured value factor. Insured value factor is the capital component that you pay for students to attend Thornton Academy, and you're reimbursed at a 5% level. And when all of this adds up from page 2 and page 3, you're looking at a combined allocation of $35.839 million. As you move to page 4, you take $35.839, you take your valuation, which is in section B, multiply it by the mill expectation, which is what they say you must raise for education. And they say in Saco, you must raise $18.3 million. You subtract those two numbers from A and B, and you have $17,443,000 worth of pre-K through 12 subsidy. Okay? So that's what you're getting from the state. You go one more page back. And you know what I did on this one? I put the wrong slide in there. I put the wrong page 5 slide in there. I apologize for that. I put one of the other districts' page 5 slide on there. Didn't notice that. But what I can tell you is that on that slide, if we go back to page 4, with $17.443 million, on that next page, you get a regional service center allocation, and you get about $110,000-ish in the regional service center of additional allocation. So it takes that number up to over $17.5 million. So you know that that's coming from the state. Now as we look at what our cost drivers, reductions, position changes are as we get to our budget, we know that employee steps and wages are about $581,000. We know that between some of our changes in health insurance, plus having a 10% increase in the budget, there's another $559,000 there. So of this $1.6 million increase, $1.1 million of it is absolutely salary and benefits. Now, will health insurance come in at 10%? I hope not. But when I look at the experience ratings of where we were, it's a little bit on the higher side. Typically, rates haven't gone up over 8%, but the reason I started with 10% this year is because I think you look at the COVID factor and you just don't know what that might do to health insurance rates. That scares me a little bit, and at some point there has to be some impact on that piece. Maybe it will go down. Maybe we'll have a great year, and we'll be able to come back and talk about a reduction in the next phase of the budget. When we talked about this sheet the other night, and we talked about additional items that added money to the budget, and we're talking about increase in tuition. And last year, and that's $35,000, which is actually a positive for us in this from a financial standpoint on our side, because last year you were budgeting for 926 students. There is, certainly just less students feeding in from the graduating class to the 8th grade class, and that trend continues in a downward fashion. We added seed, and we talked about that the other night, that when you bill for main care, you also have 34% that you have to pay out and kind of match, and that's reduced from your state subsidy. So you have $165,000 there to offset that reduction in subsidy. We have vocational funding for TA students that we've talked about some last year, that the gap between state funding for vocational students and the operating costs, the area towns are chipping in to cover that piece. In this budget, we've added a resiliency coordinator at SMS to go along with what we have at our elementary schools. We know that we need an SRO at our schools, and Chief Clement has been wonderful to work with in the fact that, we talked about where that number should sit, whether that's on the school side, city side. We really felt that since that person would be spending 3/4 of their time working with the school department, that probably appropriately that 3/4 of a salary set on our side. Again, it's one pocket or the other, but it's a true cost at the school department. Adding a day one person at SMS that we did earlier this year. We have an added homeless liaison, that halftime piece that's in the budget that we're hoping to offset with grant funding. Making sure that CK Burns has a full-time social worker. They're at .8 right now. And then looking at increases in coursework, just kind of looking at what that true number has been based off some expenditures. And you're pretty close to the additions in there, pretty close to that $500,000 difference. Now, there are some things that we took out. And actually, one other piece in the budget is we continue that $500,000 of additional capital funding at SMS to hopefully take the next bite at the roof. Some decreases is that we decrease some of the summer school lines based off the fact of not seeing expenditures, decrease in superintendent's salary, eliminating 4 unfilled ed tech positions, decrease contracted nursing services for a student that may not be here, decreased contract, that should be a typo there, contracted IEP support of $40,000, so you have a total decrease of $325 to kind of offset some of those other pieces. The other piece that we talked about is reallocated 2 staff members from special education to bring back the alternative ed program at SMS. That's a program that needs to be there for students. And then also part of that reallocation would be moving the PATHS program to Fairfield School. So there'd be one PATHS program in the district, K2, have the Coast program go to Young School. We can serve students a little more efficiently. And we also have the challenge that the music and art program at Fairfield Schools on a cart. By making this move, we can give them back a classroom. Something that needs to happen. We need to get that space back in an appropriate classroom. That's just a lot to ask for a teacher. As we begin to look at expenses versus revenue, we can look at the budget on the next page, and you can see that total expenditures increased by $1.6 million, or 3.63%. Because of additional subsidies on the other page, a lot of those coming from the state, the tax increase that we would be looking for, additional money increase, is $219,000, or 0.77%. Now, what makes this interesting is that Jason and I, have those conversations. What does valuation and new properties being built, and how does this all work out? Because this is a puzzle of, we have to combine the needs of the city versus the needs of the school department, bring those all together, make this work. And based off where we would be right now in our ask, Glennis is estimating that this would actually have a negative impact of the 50-cent range or more to the mill rate in the city of where things are snapshotted today. Now, does that mean that will necessarily be there? But that means that we're in a pretty good position today of how it would impact the tax rate. Certainly the things that are not in this budget that we need to talk about, and Mr. Archer, and I know others will join us here, is looking at that SMS situation. And we talk with students and staff of furniture that is at least 25 years old, and I've heard some reports that it might be older than that.
A lot of it is original.
Original.
I was there when I was there.
Okay.
That's a lot longer ago than when.
Okay. And we were, just talking with students and teachers the other day, and, one of the comments that a teacher said to us was, oh, so if we had new furniture, maybe I can decrease the amount of pants that I rip, by going by old furniture that you get caught on the side. And again, I think that it's about looking at that school, knowing that no matter what happens in the construction project, that school's going to be standing and operational, and we're there. And we have some things that we need to take care of in that building. Having Mr. Rodman, who's come in and spent some time in other middle schools, and being able to give us some that outsider look into some of the things that we need to do, knowing that we'll be able to put some money into the roof, and knowing that we have a fair amount of money put towards revolving renovations funds where we get to improve the air quality there. Is now looking at some of the cosmetic type things and the furniture that support our students, so that as you walk into that school, you begin to have a little bit of a different feeling as you come in. So I think that's an important piece for us. So from a very high-level overview, this is where we are, and I think it would be a great time for us to dive in a little bit more and take some questions about things. I would say our next piece after this would be to schedule between now and the 28th, which is a Monday night, another board workshop for review, because on the 28th we present that kind of budget to the council. After that piece, I am hopeful that that last week in March, that first week in April, we receive those health insurance numbers so that we can formally adopt that budget on that first April meeting.
Any questions for the superintendent?
Excuse me, quick question about the valuation piece. As the valuations continue to increase and the subsidies go down, does that mean there's just a bigger share from the city side?
Yeah, so they will shift, if you'll see on page 5, and I apologize for having the wrong one in there. You have a state share and a local share. And as your property, the assumption is mathematically that the more property value that you have, the higher that is, the greater ability a community has to pay. And so, yes, the answer is yes, as property values rise, and if you outpace the rest of the state, you're going to see a decreased subsidy.
Superintendent Ray, I think this is like fantastic. Thank you for walking us through it. It makes a lot of sense, and it's a great overview. For a little bit of education for me, on page 2 on the disadvantaged rate.
Yep.
I thought that I had heard that the free lunch is not at Thornton Academy. Is that provided to Saco residents?
So it's my understanding that a universal free lunch, I know that they support students who are, that would qualify for a free lunch, but universally right now in the state, all students have the ability to get a free lunch, and it's my understanding that that may not be the case.
And I guess I bring that up because I remember, months ago, you had been, and everyone here had been repeating, hey, everybody, it's really important that we turn in our paperwork for the universal lunches. And I guess my thought there is, if that's not supported at the same level at Thornton Academy for Saco students, there really wouldn't be an incentive for those families to fill out that paperwork, because they wouldn't necessarily, again, from my understanding, they wouldn't necessarily benefit from it, but...
In a normal year, the answer would be that it was important to kill for those forms. And again, when we were pushing, every year as a superintendent, you push those forms, and you push that out there, and you are making sure that kids have an opportunity to qualify because you want no one falling through. In the last 2 years, where it has been universally free for kiddos, we as superintendents were certainly worried about this number. This is what we were worried about, because we could see that they weren't coming in. Our schools and our food and nutrition staff, they know families, they know situations, our principals, our resiliency, our guidance counselor, our social workers. And in a normal situation, you'd be able to make sure that that happened. But in this situation, there was no incentive to fill out that form because the playing field was leveled. All kids had an opportunity to eat for free, all families. And what we've seen from that is a situation where you're seeing greater participation in the school lunch program. you're seeing more meals go through because there is zero embarrassment, there is any of those pieces. And, quite frankly, as all of us see rising costs in our homes, whether that be from heating oil to gasoline to rising food costs, me, others, yeah, send your kids and have them eat at school. It's a great, nutritious lunch. I don't have to pack lunch in the morning time. And it helps school departments because typically your reimbursement rate from the federal government is greater than your production cost. So when you think of the wonderful job that Sue does for us, and we've always been a school department that typically operates in the black, she's able to grow that revenue so that we don't have a request that comes for a new stove or a new this or a new that. So it's really a benefit for students to take that lunch at school.
But I guess though, without that participation from the 9 to 12 range there on 3, that kind of artificially deflates that 30% number, or?
That 30% is calculated off what we get, and then it, whether they participate or not, they're using our K through 8 number. So it's the same thing I have in Dayton K through 5. Whatever that K through 5 rate is set at, they apply that directly to the upper students. So our percentage rates that we collect here in the district set that number for 9 through 12. If that makes sense.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up because I think I know where you were going with this, Will. So the reduction in participation that we've seen in the last year or so relative to the forms being filled out, has that had a negative impact on that number?
So luckily, no, because they took a 3-year average. So they looked at that last year that you were collecting forms in 2019-20, and every school, and they took the highest of what you had for a number and moved it forward. And every superintendent and the experience that we have is that highest number was when you were collecting forms, not without. As we know that we move into another school year where you're going to have the ability to have universal school lunches for kids, we're going to continue to have to work with the state of what is that strategy to make sure that we have a true number of what our disadvantage rates are, because I suspect that, I think we can go back another year. We were in the 20s last year. And so we have worked hard to communicate that to the commissioner, and she has a strong understanding of what schools face in this arena, and we're going to have to continue to advocate for whether either a different metric or some other way of making sure that we get that information. Because if you're a family right now, why fill out the form?
School Member Johnson?
Excuse me. Superintendent Ray, could you just go over again, under the decreased items,
Yep.
particularly the elimination of the the unfilled ed tech positions?
Mm-hmm.
Give us a background on that again, please.
Yeah, so as we looked at one of the pieces that we came into here looking, at our budget and our budget situation, and what Jess needs for positions in the special ed line. Currently, we have 85, or actually 83 ed techs in the current year budget. We are filling approximately about 73 of those on a consistent basis. And so we looked at a number to make sure that we had some buffer of filled positions, and that as we look at bringing everybody back next year who's there, and looking at having, obviously there's some savings in the moving of the Coast and the Pass program. We can be a little bit more efficient there. But making sure that Jess had, and I believe our number is 78 positions, Jason's out there. I believe it's at 78 or 79, there should be 79 positions in the budget, with only initially filling 75 of those, and making sure we have a buffer in place for move-ins, for kids who may need service, for additional pieces. And quite frankly, the ability to fill those 75 may be a bit challenging for us as well.
School Board Member Richard.
I brought it up at the workshop, but I'd like to revisit the need for a licensed pre-K special education teacher for a few reasons. Compliance, obviously, but learning about a different way to bill for their therapies as well, and having that ability to bill for through main care, billing as developmental therapy. Also, actually, there's some legislation that's in the works, LD 386 and LD 255, that if passed would shift the provision of special education services for children with disabilities from 4 to 6 years old from the current CDS system to SAUs. MDOE actually would like to move all FAPE for 3 and 4-year-olds by July 1st, 2023 to SAUs. So given that information, I'd like to see whatever the need is for a special education teacher at the pre-K, that put in the budget.
I think, Jeff, you and I have had some conversations about that I'd like to work on something. I think we can get to that solution and have that revenue offset one way or the other. I think we can get there. Just need some time to figure that all out.
I have a
Member
question. So when you're saying time frame for figuring that all out, Mr. Superintendent Ray, can you clarify if that would be for this budget cycle or next budget cycle?
Oh, I think it's our goal to make that happen, make sure that there's a position in place for the fall, whether that is funded locally or the state is paid for that through a revenue that comes our way, or there is a third party that comes in. I think there are solutions for that. So I think we can make it happen. Just need to find the best pathway for us to do that. While, again, while those laws are coming our way, possibly, CDS has a transition and the state has a transition to figure out how that funding goes. And I have been someone who has said that I am very concerned of the transition of funding from the CDS program to the local school department through the 279. And the reason that I say that is that while it may not happen here in this community, there could be communities who begin to start making choices about taxes, expenditures, etc., because of what their ED 279 says, and services are diminished. So I worry about those two funding streams coming together through the state funding model, and have advocated that if this happens, this needs to be similar, more similar to, say, a vocational center, where that comes as an addition that you have to spend and that you can't decrease because you need a new whatever. That is my fear about how that money comes to us through a funding stream.
Thank you.
School Board Member Gale.
Shifting gears here on slide 1 with the attending counts for the students. We talk a lot about the decline in enrollment kind of generally, but I thought it was kind of interesting with the pre-K through K. And just from your experience and helping to educate me, is this a typical trend that we see where pre-K enrollments grow year over year and then it kind of dissipates in the upper grades as folks matriculate up, or is this maybe potentially a spot of growth or a...
So one if you look at the pre-K and K piece, that's slightly higher, is that I think you've had better success filling all of the slots at the pre-K that are available. So that's number one. And certainly we have some conversations like the other day, I think, Jamae, you were in email with somebody who works in town and wanted to bring their kid to Saco pre-K. They work in the school department. And, in that situation, we have to answer, well, first we need to serve local kiddos first and make sure that we're not in a lottery situation. But sometimes we have some of those sitting on the side that come September, if you're not there, you can say, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense because you're building that student count and you're filling those numbers. I think traditionally what I've seen in school departments is that your class sizes are bigger in the smaller level. And one of the pieces that, I worry about a little bit here, and well, again, I worry about it in all of Southern Maine, house affordability. As people either are looking to buy their second property from their first home, or if we look at the rising costs of rent in this area, what is that going to do with people with kids that are living in some of our apartments? Can they afford it? So we could see that number decrease. Statewide trends don't say that populations rise. We are the oldest state in the United States. And so that trend is going down every single year. I suspect part of us being probably a little higher this year was because we had 5 days a week. In other years, or the year prior, people made some educational decisions for their family that met their work life. I don't see populations increasing dramatically. Now, new housing development on a certain side of town may skew some things. And that would be something that hopefully with a new building will address those situations to, you won't have that problem of one school being bigger than the other and redrawing lines or letting kids cross boundaries.
Any other questions? Okay, just quickly before we move on, the slide 5, that's wrong.
Yep.
The budget book also has the full 279.
Yep.
And that'll have the right page on it. So if you're looking for the real numbers, that's where they'll be. Okay, moving on to item E, which is first reading of policies. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair. I move that we approve the first reading of revised policies, AD, Educational Philosophy, ADA, School District Goals and Objectives, BEC, Executive Sessions, BEDFA, Abstentions, BIC, Board Member Freedom of Access Training, and BID, Board Member Compensation.
Second.
First and second. Any discussion? Okay, roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
I vote yes. School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
School Board Member Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. That brings us to item F, which is second reading of policies. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the second reading of policies AC, non-discrimination, equal opportunity, and affirmative action, ACAB, harassment and sexual harassment of school employees, ACAB-R, employee discrimination / harassment, and Title IX, sexual harassment complaint procedures, ADAA, school system commitment to standards for ethical and responsible behavior, ACAA-R, Student Discrimination and Harassment Complaint Procedure, ACAA, Harassment and Sexual Harassment of Students, ACAC, Service Animals in School, ADC, Tobacco-Free Schools, Use and Possession of Tobacco and Electronic Smoking Devices, ACAD, Hazing, ADF, School District Commitment to Learning Results, and GBEB, Workplace Bullying.
Second.
Okay, there's a first and a second. Any discussion? Okay, roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
I vote yes. School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
School Board Member Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Okay, that brings us to other information. Is there any other information this evening?
I think we just ought to, I'll send out an email just about what that next date would look like to have a board workshop before the 28th on budget piece. So look for something from me or for one with a couple of different options. Probably be like a doodle poll so that we can put something out, and we'll send it to everybody.
Thank you. Okay, there's no executive session this evening. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Johnson? Oops, I'm jumping ahead. School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
I vote yes. School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
School Board Member Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 7-0. We are adjourned at 8:12. Thank you. Have a good evening.